Okay, I would like to welcome everybody to the fall semester uh, midterm briefings. We are at the halfway point in our management simulation of some of the most interesting environmental bills I've ever seen, and in an era when it actually appears as if some of them might be enacted. And so this is an important moment. We are also halfway through this master's program in about a week. And so you just arrived, and very soon you'll be graduating. And so it really does happen very quickly, and hopefully the learning is going on and people are happy with what they've learned. I'm very happy with what I'm seeing so far. The products of this workshop that I've experienced and heard and read are spectacular, and I'm very impressed. The midterm briefings are devoted to the issue of what should we do. In other words, you get a bill, and the bill is big and vague, and you've got to bring it down to what we call a program design. So the first half of our semester is getting to the point where we answer the what question. What do we do? The second half of the semester is devoted to the issue of how do we do it. And so that's what will be going on through the second half of the semester. And when you manage a program, management is tricky. It's a craft. It's hard to figure out. And once we figure out what we're going to do, the second half of the semester will be who's going to do the work, how much is it going to cost, how are we going to know what's happening, and what can we do in our first year. And so that's really what's going to happen throughout the second half of the semester. And we are going to begin with our first briefer, talking about the San Francisco Bay Restoration Act of 2021. And I believe Aaron Zweig is our briefer. Please come forward.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to our midterm briefing on our work this far on Bill H.R. 610, otherwise known as the San Francisco Restoration Act. I'd like to just take a moment to thank my task team, Alina, Carolyn, and Amir, as well as my team at large. I'd also love to just give a special thank you to our advisor, Lloyd Cass, for his guidance on the project thus far. Let's dive in. So for the agenda today, let's start off with the San Francisco Bay and the current problems taking place, the bill itself, and how it plans to tackle the problems, the bill's components, the various stakeholders involved, our program design that will generate the best expected restoration outcomes, and finally, the upcoming tasks necessary to implement our program. So before we even really begin, let's recap why the San Francisco Bay is so important. It's the fourth largest economy in the US and is a hub for technological, financial, industrial, and agricultural activity, among other sectors. Its environmental makeup provides a home to thousands of animals and plants, some of which are only found in the Bay. Because of the critical role it plays for humans, animals, and plants, it has been classified as a wetland of international importance. But while the Bay provides almost innumerable benefits, it has suffered over the last century. Urban sprawl, resource extraction, and industrial activity have caused habitat degradation and an increase in invasive species, placing native species at risk. In fact, over the last century, the San Francisco Bay has lost close to 90% of its wetlands. Further pollutants and eutrophication have decreased the Bay's water quality, harmed marine life, and negatively impacted food chains at large. And then there's climate change, which puts additional stress on an already impacted environment. For instance, rising sea levels put human populations at risk, damage wildlife habitats, and increase the presence of pollutants in the water, as inundation of shoreline industrial activity drags harmful chemicals into the bay. These issues often compound off one another, damaging the environmental and economic prosperity of the bay. And so, the San Francisco Restoration Act was created. The bill's intent, taken directly from the document itself, is to amend the Federal Water Pollution Control Act to establish a grant program to support the restoration of San Francisco Bay. Its objective is to drive equitable economic growth and to create a resilient bay overall. The bill outlines 4 sub-goals to restore the bay: improving water quality, wetland restoration, native species recovery, and ensuring the bay can adapt to increasing levels of climate change. Now, there are certain mandatory components to this bill. First, the bill requires a San Francisco Restoration Office, along with a director, to be established in the EPA. Second, local and regional stakeholders must be consulted before restoration programs are developed. And finally, in conjunction with said stakeholders, projects must be prioritized and fulfill one of the 4 sub-goals mentioned on the previous slide. Efforts to restore the bay do not start with H.R. 610. Many NGOs, governmental and private organizations, indigenous tribes, and so on have worked for years to improve the bay's overall quality. For example, the San Francisco Estuary Partnership, established under the Clean Water Act, has restored nearly 30,000 acres of floodplains over the last roughly 30 years. However, a coordinated effort is often lacking, and that is something that this bill and our program design hope to address directly. So there's been a lot of buildup, but let's finally get into the program design. There are basically 3 overarching components. The first establishes a centralized program office that oversees project coordination and assesses project priorities. The second takes consulting with stakeholders further by requiring the new office to work directly with established partners in the bay to build upon their existing restoration efforts. And finally, while existing efforts are crucial, part of ensuring an equitable restoration is making sure local and underprivileged communities are involved in the recovery process. Therefore, the third component establishes an independent grant project program where non-established stakeholders can request funding for historically overlooked or underfunded projects. Now, before choosing this program design, we spent a lot of time deliberating on whether we should go with a more EPA-directed model or a community-driven approach. The EPA-directed model would establish a program office where they would be the sole decision makers, and only a small portion of the program would be communicating with the local community. Alternatively, the community-driven approach would rely solely on proposals from local stakeholders to determine which projects to pursue. We ended up seeing the benefits of both programs and decided to move forward with our current program design, a negotiated model of sorts. This framework combines the strengths of both models into one. This program design will provide a foundation for the bay's restoration. Creating a centralized program office provides the oversight to coordinate the restoration effort in the bay. By partnering with existing organizations, we do not have to start from scratch. Instead, we use their existing knowledge and efforts in the bay to create feasible objectives, metrics, and baselines. We'll look at their successful efforts and other efforts that could be improved upon further. This is key, as establishing metrics and benchmarks is the only way to track progress and improve. Startup costs can often be expensive and time-consuming. However, working with these established partners will cut down on costs and needed time. And by doubling down on many of the existing efforts, we ensure program consistency, thereby reducing the friction that can be accompanied by the introduction of a new bill. We expect these benefits to help kickstart the program's restoration efforts and to provide the Bay with as much of the $25 million as possible right away. The funding of independent projects guarantees communication with the local community. The program director may reassess all programs and funding on an annual basis, providing flexibility to local stakeholders as new and pressing local issues may need funding. And finally, by working with established organizations and funding local independent projects, the program is accountably addressing issues in the Bay. Our hope is that this feature helps to create an equitable restoration. Next, we'll be devising an organizational plan, a budget, a performance management structure, and a master calendar, all of which are crucial to the successful implementation of our bill. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll very happily take any of your questions now.
First off, thank you so much for the great presentation. I just have a question. Could you please just tell me more about why is there a lack of coordination between different stakeholders?
I'm sorry, the last part cut off. Did you say between stakeholders?
Yeah, why is there a lack of coordination between different stakeholders?
Sure. That's a good question, and again, our bill addresses that directly. A lot of these partners, while doing great work in the Bay, are not operating with one another. That's just because they're different organizations, NGOs, private organizations, tribes, and so our hope is that this bill can provide that oversight and coordination that, while has been effective, can still be improved upon. Thank you for that question.
Hi. I have a question about the centralized office. Do you imagine it to be its like own freestanding entity, or is it going to be like within the scope of the regional office of the EPA in San Francisco?
That's a good question. It will be under the regional office.
Excellent presentation. I'm curious what you perceive the breakdown between the pre-established projects and the sort of local community projects grants, like what the resources will be for each.
Right. I think, first of all, that's going to change on an annual basis. For example, right now, there's a spill in the Bay, and this would be a perfect time for funding to possibly shift more to that local community, making sure that it's cleaned up in an equitable fashion. So while I don't have a percentage breakdown, part of our program design provides that flexibility to kind of go back and forth, talk to those established partners, and see where we can go from there.
Thank you very much.